Welcome to Transliterature. I'm Dr. Baikovsky, and today we're going to talk about stereotypes. In society, we usually think of stereotypes as social conventions, myths, false information about a group of people that is ultimately untrue but gets repeated nonetheless. In my class, we talk about the ways in which stereotypes also have a literal meaning within the realm of printing and book creation, literally in the background of creating literature. Stereotypes go back to the printing press and to printing methods that would use fixed type, fixed images, often on harder materials such as metals, that would be created, and it's not movable, it's not changeable, and that you would put ink on it and then press onto paper, put more ink on it, press it again, and it repeats the same image with a certain degree of consistency over and over and over again very quickly and for a long time because it's made out of very tough and durable materials. So how did we get from the printing press and the stereotype, literally the fixed type, how do we get from that to the metaphor of the stereotype, especially the stereotypes that revolve around gender, sexuality, race, disability, and so forth? Well, it's fairly direct if you think about what a stereotype is compared to other types of printing. It's fixed, meaning it doesn't change over time. It's by definition not adaptable. It's enduring. It's created with a conservative ethos of remaining true to a certain form and structure over time. It does not lean into progress. It does not lean into change. Then there's the fact that they're easily replicated, that it creates the same impression, the same structure, the same images, the same words, literally, words on a page over and over and over again. And so it can be distributed fairly widely. Stereotypes' power partially comes from the fact that they are able to travel through different forms of media. They're able to get out there so that someone reading on one part of the country is reading the same thing as in another part because they're able to mass produce these forms. And it goes back to sort of in the dreams of industrialization, of standardization and fairly wide mass distribution. And as that relates to human society and our concepts and our images of different groups of people, what that means is that people that may have never encountered a person from a group that is being depicted by this stereotype, their primary mode of reference for this group of people that they've never met, that may be more populous on another part of the country, is primarily through this documentation. And because it's cheaper and more widely distributed, to put in social terms, it's often more simplistic, easy to digest. It's coming at you from multiple media. Even people who are a part of that group will find themselves with a excess of this material based on these stereotypes, based on these easy to reproduce and heavily reproduced images. And then just a simple matter of speed, that the printing press with a stereotype is able to copy itself fairly quickly in a much more rapid rate. For instance, if you go back to trying to hand write things, which takes a certain amount of intentional energy, focus, and some degree of training and expertise, whereas this machine will just replicate things quickly without even anyone needing to be very intentional. And so people can say things, can think things, can recreate and repeat certain stereotypes without really taking the time to think about what they're saying, without reflecting back at what they're even doing, and without any degree of necessary intention about replicating these prejudices. So stereotypes, both as a industrial printing phenomenon and as a personal social phenomenon, just operate very quickly, so quickly that oftentimes people who are a part of these systems aren't even stopping to think about what they're doing. So what does this have to do with transliterature? Well, the stereotypes that focus around sex, race, and sexuality certainly come into play. Um, the standards of what is defined within Europe and the United States and beyond because of colonization, and capitalism and mass industrialization, and the fact that the United States creates so much media, is that our images of what defines a man, what defines a woman, what allowances, if any, are given to people that live and think beyond the binary, are often based in white supremacist, patriarchal, Christian, colonial mindsets. And that gets fairly widely distributed and baked into many of the norms that get enculturated around the world. And so people who may not live in their environment, may not reflect a white, suburban, middle class Christian neighborhood, nonetheless find themselves judging themselves and others in relation to those norms. Before we even get into transliterature itself, most of the images and stories and words, again, thinking about printing, replication of words and ideas that people have about transgender people, are not coming from transgender people. The people who have control over the writing and the replication of these images are often cisgender, they're heterosexual, as well as being white and Christian, from an upper class or middle class American background. And so the concepts of what a transgender person looks like reflects many of the prejudices, anxieties, internal tensions that cisgender people are dealing with in relation to their own world, and that they're sort of trying to fit transgender people into that imaginative framework, into that symbolic economy, to sort of represent and to be nodes where they can tie around their own anxieties and attribute them to trans people, even though they don't necessarily, those anxieties and images don't necessarily come from the trans community, they come from the cisgender community. The power of transgender literature is not merely to present transgender images in ways that are legible to cisgender communities, and as a window that a cisgender person can look into the transgender world and go, ah, okay, I understand, or say, oh, okay, transgender people are just like us. The fact that, every window is going to be a mirror as well. You're going to see commonalities. You're going to make those connections. But also the way that transgender literature gives us a window into different ways of imagining, different symbols, different signs and signifiers, many of which are borrowed or taken or are deconstructed from dominant cisgender orders and literature, but have been broken down, reverse engineered, reclaimed to create something else, as well as using tools and methods that cisgender writers just wouldn't have thought of or wouldn't have used in those ways. And so you're getting many of the things that a stereotype is not able to do. Transgender literature is able to be flexible, whereas stereotypes are fixed. Transgender literature calls on you to go slow, to listen, to absorb information that may be different, that might be educating your palate, educating your emotions in your imagination, to think of other ways of being, other ways of structuring information even. Which takes time. The promise that a stereotype gives is that you can go quickly, and this literature, this symbolic world is telling people to slow down, stop, look around, listen, and change the way you process things. To conclude, one of the major arguments for trans literature is to help us deconstruct, to recognize, and to refashion stereotypes, to break them down when necessary, to understand what from them is being used in new ways, and ultimately to give ourselves the power and permission to set them aside, to put them into the relics, into the museums, something that can be referenced, but something that ultimately we acknowledge no longer really serves, if it served at all in any beneficial way. So if you like this kind of video where we are not just talking about specific pieces of transliterature, but also talking about some of the wider concepts that inform and empower transliterature, and how transliterature can turn feedback and help our wider world, drop me a comment, drop this video a like, and I look forward to having further conversations with you. And in the meanwhile, keep reading.